Welcome to the Existential Empath Podcast. My name is Tanya, and I am an intuitive empath. My intention is to share valuable tools and techniques that I have learned so you can tap into your own inner healer naturally and intuitively. Welcome back, everyone. Today I have guest John David Latta. John is an author, teacher, and former founder and CEO of a multi-million-dollar consumer products company. He teaches workshops on leadership, healing, transformation, awakening, love, and wisdom that unite and expand human experience. John is the author of The Synchronicity of Love, where he shares personal stories that heal, transform, and awaken. Welcome, John. It's a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Thank you so much, Tanya. I'm really glad to be here. Appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, so you and I are going to dialogue about making peace with death, finding freedom and fearlessness through spiritual awakening. So for nearly 20 years, I worked in healthcare, and I saw death almost daily. It was very normal for me to see death, and it was very common. But I also saw transformation as well. I saw transformation amongst patients and amongst families. And so, John, I want to talk a little bit about your story and why you feared death so greatly and how you overcome that oppressive fear of death.
That's a great question, Tanya.
We're going to dive right in.
Jump right in. John's greatest fear. Okay, let's go. Well, so first of all, I don't know why I don't know where the fear of death came from. I was going through a really difficult time in my life. But it's still, at the time, what I was going through seemed like a struggle, not the kind of thing where I would suddenly be confronting death. And I don't know where it came from. Growing up, I'd been a part-time Catholic at best. And my limited understanding of death was, well, if you do good, you go to heaven. If you do bad, you go to the other place. And I think there's an in-between place too. Anyway, so I'm
going somewhere. You just don't know where, right?
Somewhere hanging out, can't decide where to put me. Yeah. And, but it was terrifying because at the time I had kind of lived this sort of rigid, rational view of life. Definitely a scientific view. Definitely if I can't see it, touch it, smell it, taste it, it ain't real. I was very disdainful of spiritual people, spiritual practices, religion, didn't go to church for 30 years. So you can imagine suddenly I'm overcome with this terrifying fear of death, which to me, I just associated with the body. And if the body died, I thought that was the end of me forever.
Yeah.
And it was the forever. It was the oblivion that just was gnawing at me. And I didn't know who to talk to about it. I don't think I would have the courage to talk to anybody about it. I didn't even know there were books on the subject. And so behind closed doors, I'm in tears, just terrified of death. So how did I overcome it? First of all, I went to my first ever spiritual retreat in the summer of 2002. And that same retreat leader, his name was Dr. William Brew Joy, MD. He went by his middle name Brew, very popular in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. I kind of caught him at the tail end of his career. And 3 years later, I joined a year-round study group, spiritual study group. And I remember it like yesterday. He said, okay, for the month of November, we're going to explore and greet the mystery of death.
Oh, wow.
I thought, oh my God, finally.
You're like, I need to work on this.
Most. Yeah. And so he goes, I want you to prepare for your death. If you don't have a will, make a will. If you need to make amends to people or say something that needs to be said, plan on dying at the end of this month. And so, if you need to have a conversation with your kids, your parents, family, somebody that you're at odds with, do it now. Then he said, I want you to meditate on death. Pray on death, read books on death, listen to music on death. In other words, don't run from the thing that not all of us, but most of us fear. Embrace it, run towards it. And oh my God, I found it unbelievably freeing, Tanya. And so
I was going to say, did you feel restricted or did you feel free when he said that?
I felt like elated because I learned something from that experience that I've never forgotten. You resist something long enough, it's time to just stop resisting and turn around and face it and embrace it if you can, because it's the running that causes the pain. And sometimes the turning around and facing it is so much easier than the the imagination runs wild when you're running from it. There's a wonderful story in Judith Orloff wrote a book called Second Sight. And you may be familiar with her because she's an empath like you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
She told this great story. She, like me, gets a lot of information through dreams. And she was a psychiatrist and had formed a business partnership with a guy. It was a business partnership. And they both were at odds with how to take the business. But she wasn't speaking up for herself. She wasn't saying what needed to be said. Instead, she was running around seething in rage and anger, just mad. And she has this horrific dream where this giant forest fire is chasing her and she's running from it in terror. And this voice says, you know, if you face the fire, it won't hurt you. And so in the dream, she stops and turns around, faces the fire, poof, it quickly disappears in just smoldering ash. And she knew she needed to go talk to her partner, and she did, and everything was fine. It wasn't easy, but it was fine. And so here I was doing the same, essentially the same thing, turning around and facing the thing that I'd been running from for quite a period of time. What happened was I had, at that time, access to answers through dreams and visions. And if I asked a question really sincerely, the key was sincerity, I would get an answer. And so I went into meditation and I said, okay, teach me about death. I'm not running from it anymore. And this woman shows up and she's like all excited. Okay, great. But before we teach you about death, first we're going to teach you all about life. And I get taken to this room, like a house, and I see the strangest scene. It's two men, but they're Siamese twins. They're connected from like the waist or the chest down. One of them is Hercules, and he's big and brawny and sinewy, and muscular and sweaty, and he's struggling to get away from his Siamese twin. The other half is Jesus, and he's very, very tall and resolute, like immovable, just like this pole. And suddenly Hercules turns around and looks at Jesus and says, oh my God, you're my brother. And they turn around, there's this embrace. So that was the first step. Okay, now you've seen, and so my interpretation of the time is, I think I was seeing that sort of very human side and that the divinity, you might say, that we're both.
And yeah, we're all one, right? We're all connected.
And we're all connected, yeah. And then the next day I go into meditation and I said, you know, teach me about death. And okay, you ready for this? So it's late October. You would appreciate this being in northern Idaho. It looks like all the farmers' fields have been, you know, everything's been harvested. It's cold. There's a harvest moon on the horizon. And in front of me is this very terrifying looking scarecrow. And he looks like a decaying human skeleton 10 feet off the ground. He's just daring me to walk past him. But I do. I walk past him. And all of a sudden, this giant harvest moon on the horizon and we fuse together and become one. And we flow as what looks like a river of liquid mercury across the surface of the earth. You know, liquid mercury has that strange sort of quality.
Yeah.
And then as if the earth was flat, it drips into deepest, darkest space. And I spend quite a bit of time in this meditation sitting in just nothingness, emptiness, just space. And then all of a sudden, I'm transformed into, you may have seen this before, you know, there's a giant grid of light around Earth right now that's there. It's being constructed, it's being maintained. And now I'm a part of that grid. And the way the grid appears to me is both as light and as millions of human beings holding each other by ankles and wrists, like there's millions of skydivers holding this grid together.
Wow, I just got goosebumps.
Oh, it was a beautiful scene.
I'm visualizing almost like an ocean and you're a water droplet, right? It's
that's
massive.
You nailed it. I was about to say there was still a sense of individuality, but there was also the sense of merging with something larger than me, a collective, you might say. And the funny thing is, from that space, I could hear the dreams, the suffering, the prayers of people on earth. And it was almost like I was a part of this grid of love and wisdom that was helping support life on earth. And so all fear of death went away after that. I went, oh, okay, so human and divine, the body might fall away. The divine part is still there. It merges with something larger than me. Some might call it God, some might call it self with a capital S. And there's still a sense of me, but there's also a sense of we. And I've always was struck by, you know, some of the Edgar Cayce readings. And
you know, it's funny you said that, John, because when you told me you were dreaming, the first name that came to my mind was Edward Casey.
And I love his stories. I love his books. And I always remembered that the voice that spoke through him was always a collective. They would always say, okay, we have the body in front of us. They would not say, okay, I'm looking at the body. It's okay, we have the body in front of us. And so I went a little further. I discovered some books by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and I had a lot of unusual experiences, and it was the greatest thing ever. And I tell people every time, like, whatever it is that you're fearing, turn around and greet it and face it. In fact, I'm halfway through a book I'm calling Making Love To, and I have all the chapters are things that most people would hate or be afraid of or run from. I'm like, can you make love to it? And so how did I overcome my fear of death? By embracing it and facing it sincerely.
Yeah, and I think that is such a powerful message, John, because, I worked with grieving families for nearly 20 years. And I, being an empath and highly intuitive, I was also seeing their soul leave the physical realm, leave their physical body. And so I began to kind of develop my own belief system around death, having a deeper understanding that we are more than just this physical body. And so, I love how you brought up that when you went to that first spiritual workshop or gathering, that your instructor had told you to, move through the stages of death as if you are moving through that. And I do encourage people to do that. Talk about what your wishes are. Talk about, what you're afraid of. And these are things that will dissolve that fear. And, me being kind of encompassed in and around death for all those years, my family really didn't have a choice. I kind of was like, all right, everybody, we're going to talk about this. And I just had a conversation yesterday with my mom, actually, because my grandmother passed a few years ago and we're just selling her house. And my mom said, hey, if you need to know what my wishes are, this is where they're located and let's talk about it. So it's funny that we're having this conversation today. And your book is named The Synchronicity of Love, because I have that synchronicity of having that conversation with my mom. And she brought up her fears of, I said, do you want to be cremated? Do you want to be buried? And she said, I have a fear of fire, but I have a fear of being in the ground, and I have a fear of water. And so we were able to talk through those. And I'm like, well, what do you want me to do? And she's like, just make sure I'm dead. And I said, Mom, I worked in death and loss for 20 years around brain dead patients. I'm pretty good at, just figuring out if someone has passed or whatnot. So it was just really, it was a good conversation, because I've had that many times with my deceased grandmother prior to her death. And I've also had it with my dad and my sister, but my mom was very fearful of it. So just her having that conversation with me, I'm hoping that it alleviated some of her fears on her end. And these are difficult conversations that it's so imperative to have when we're not sick or we're not moving through that process of knowing that
we haven't slipped into dementia or something already.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree. It's funny. My own parents are 91 and 84, and I'm treading lightly about those conversations now, because I think there is a teeny bit of dementia going on. So we've been trying to talk about things in advance before it's too late to really talk about them. But I think I'm almost envious of the 20-year history you have, and I'm sure it was difficult at times too. But I always love this idea of dying before you die. And why is it, and it's not true for everybody, but why is it that we can have the most intimate, beautiful conversations in that last week before we pass? Why does it have to be the very end? And so yeah, the whole embracing death was so all-encompassing for me. And I literally, not a lot, but I've had dreams of people who have died who have come to visit me that clearly weren't dreams. And they were always random people. They weren't somebody I was especially close to. And and every dream felt the same way, like, hey, John, how's it going? I just want you to know I'm really happy on the other side. I just want to say goodbye one last time. And it was always the same. And I don't really think it came from a place where I felt like I was afraid. Because like I said, the people were so random that would come and visit. And I'm a former competitive, hardworking, male, masculine dude around a chemical company, for God's sakes. But don't tell anybody. I've seen every episode of The Ghost Whisperer. So.
That's a great show.
It's a great show. And but yeah, I haven't had your clairvoyance being able to see the soul leaving the body, but there is a felt awareness of such things, and it's really beautiful.
It really is. And, John, I didn't have that ability activated. Well, actually, I deactivated it for a while because when I first got into that field, it was overwhelming to me. And so when I actually sat down and wrote down that I didn't want to see this, it was too much, for me. But then what happened is it amped up my clairsentience, my clear feeling. And so I was feeling the energies around me more than I was seeing them. And I will, based off of my experience with the loss of my grandmother, I've had such a deep, meaningful relationship with her since she has passed in the spirit realm through dreams, through my clairs, my clairvoyance, clairsentience, clairaudience. It's almost like we have this deep understanding that we can still communicate with one another. It's just different. It's, I can feel her energetic hug around me versus a physical hug around me. I can still hear her cackling laugh, at times. And so it is, I think, just talking about this, that yes, we are having a physical death, but it's not the end all be all. They're still here with us each and every day. And they can do things on the other side to assist us as well that they couldn't do here in the physical. And I'm witnessing that with my grandmother, how she is just with this podcast alone, her assisting me with getting the word out, getting this information out to people. And it's kind of mind-blowing to me on how much they really truly are here with us each and every day, even though they're not here in the physical. And have you experienced that, John, at all?
Not as much, but I'm really intrigued by it. I just read, a few books by Lorna Byrne, I don't know if you're familiar with her, wrote a bunch of books about communicating with angels from earliest childhood. And she literally sees a guardian angel, I think what some people might call guides, around every single person without fail. And she loves to say there are millions of unemployed angels out there just dying to be asked, please help me, And, but I love her books. But she also talked about when people pass who are close to us, they're with us. And sometimes, just to go really extreme, even a baby who died, when they were an infant, even an aborted fetus will hang around with the mother for the rest of her life. And with no judgment either. That was the other part, I was kind of like, it was kind of eye-opening what the angels revealed to her. And I think some of the things that happen in our life are scripted and planned. And to a certain extent, we plan them. And, but yeah, it's so people close to us pass and they hang out with us, sometimes for the rest of our life.
Does. And I think that just understanding that in itself helps through the grieving process. I know for me, I went through the grieving process, but I had this deep knowing or understanding that, in those states of joy, in those states of, those higher frequency emotions, I was having more contact with my grandmother on the other side, because it was harder for me to connect with her when I was in those deeper, heavier, denser emotions, because I was processing that. I was moving through the grief. And, as we move through the grief, just understanding and recognizing that they are there with us through every moment, through every, bit of anger, resentment, sadness, sorrow, whatever emotion that happens. And, Kubler-Ross talks about that, in her books, those stages of grief. And I'm very well attuned to those, because I would see different stages amongst different people and how they would process that. But just having that deep knowing and understanding that our loved ones are here with us, they're surrounding us, whether we call them guides or angels or whatever we feel, deeply resonant with, they are there with us. We just have to call upon them and open our hearts to believe that they're there with us, and I think that's the hardest part for people.
I tell people all the time, like, how could I do this? And I always say the very first thing I always say is, well, ask.
Yeah.
Just ask sincerely, and see what happens after that. And a lot of people look at me like, what? So well, just ask, I want to speak to my deceased relatives. Okay. And who knows what'll happen after that. I spent a little time looking at your bio, Tanya, and I saw you did a lot of work about releasing difficult emotions, emotion code work. And so I want to share a story that's in my book. Early on, I had started dating a gal, and at the time we were both athletic, and our first date, we went for a run together, but I couldn't keep up because I'd had a lingering chest cold that had lasted for weeks. And she goes, you should go see my nutritionist. And I thought, well, okay, I think I eat okay, but I'll go see. Well, the nutritionist was undercover psychic, and her cover is nutritionist, but she was actually, I think, what you would call a medical intuitive.
We do that a lot, John. We have covers.
I know. I mean, I jokingly ended my chapter saying, "Hey, thank you to all you undercover healers out there." So
we're on the
there's
down
a
low.
lot of them. Anyway, she spent the first 20 minutes checking in with her intuition, and then deciding if I was going to be able to hear what she had to offer to me, because I went in thinking she's going to change my diet somehow. She didn't say one word about my diet. She said, John, you have grief trapped all the way back in earliest childhood. It's related to your mother, and you need to release it. And she goes, do you cry easily? And I said, no. and she goes, okay. So she gives me a homeopathic remedy called lung. Says take 10 drops twice a day. And what can you do? What makes you cry? I say, well, sometimes I tear up over a sappy movie. Go watch the sappy movie, see if you can let yourself cry. And it took a while, I don't know, 2 or 3 or 4 movies. And it was almost like this dam burst. And I was literally on my hands and knees sobbing over, I don't know what.
Yeah.
But I just had been kind of sitting on all the grief instead of, it just wasn't a natural, normal thing for me to process grief easily. So I would stuff it. And I'm not the only guy that does that,
And women too, John. Women do it too.
Yeah. But, the weird thing is on the other side of that I remember getting done crying going, God, no wonder people do this. This feels really good,
Yeah, it's a good release of energy.
Yeah, and on the other side of that release has been greater and greater subtlety for me, greater and greater sensitivity to me. But it's true, when you're in the energy of anger and fear, it's hard to access grandma on the other side. Yeah. If you're the energy of grief, it's hard. If it's also hard if you're in the energy of massive resistance, And so I do try to encourage people to allow your feelings, move through your feelings, because to hit that sort of higher vibration you're talking about, I think that there has to be some work done around both releasing feelings at the same time not getting stuck in them. It's hard to put into words.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting she gave you a tincture for lung, because lungs in the heart is where our grief gets stuck. Yeah. And oftentimes, for those stuffers, out there who stuff those emotions down, they can present in COPD, they can present in asthma, they'll physically manifest certain ailments or issues specifically around the lungs or even the heart, just cardiac related issues. And so that was very common with my mom. She had lost both of her parents. Her dad right the year I was born, and then her mom not too many years after that. And so she has presented with COPD, for many, many years. And I've just encouraged her, Mom, it's time to release that grief around that. And she's a stuffer. She taught me how to stuff, those emotions down. Now my dad's a weeper, so it's kind of funny. And it reminds me of that movie, The Holiday, with Cameron Diaz. I don't know if you've ever watched that movie, but if you haven't, you should check it out. Yeah. She struggles with crying, and then she meets a guy, and he's a weeper. And it's just the cutest. It's the perfect movie around this time of year, because she has, she bottled up those emotions, and then guess what opens her up is love. She falls in love, and that's what opens her up. So leading into that, let's talk about your book, John, The Synchronicity of Love, and how you came about, writing this book.
Yeah, well, so let's see. The 60-second version is I was living a relatively charmed life, and then in a period of time, everything that could go wrong all went wrong at the same time. My wife got cancer. 2 weeks after she was diagnosed, they went in surgery, removed her entire thyroid gland, a bunch of lymph nodes, and every day after that, she has to take a pill just to live, synthetic thyroid hormone. She began to go very inward, reading books about God, the meaning of life, things like that. And then I wasn't really in a mature place in my life where I could support her through that process. And I think she was doing a lot of reevaluating of her own life. At the same time, I had left my very secure job, started my own company. I lost all of our money and a whole bunch more, $650,000 in personal debt,
Wow.
getting my company off the ground. And every day, just one hair's breadth away from going bankrupt and just hanging by a thread. And then that fear of death at the same time. Then
funny. I've noticed that, John, that correlation with loss of money and loss of life. I've noticed that with several of my guests.
Yeah.
So not to interrupt, but I just wanted to bring that up.
I don't think I had any conscious awareness around any of it. All I know is, where the heck is this coming from? And I can't deal with this now too. And then in the middle of it all, my wife decides she wants a whole new life and leaves and says, you keep the kids, I'm leaving, a whole new life. So I'm a single dad with custody of a 9-year-old and 11-year-old, a company that's less than zero, just hanging by a thread, and a grown man running around behind closed doors, terrified of death. And so prior to that time, Tanya, I was highly resistant to anything spiritual or religious for 30 years. I was kind of antagonistic towards people like that. I thought it was all woo-woo and make-believe. But I had fallen in love with the author, Michael Crichton, and he wrote a book called Travels that a lot of people don't know about. It's sort of an autobiography, and he went through a difficult time in his life. And he also found the courage to go to his first ever spiritual retreat. And I loved reading about his stories there. And so things were so rock bottom for me that I found the guy. I was shocked. 20 years later, he looked like he was teaching the exact same thing that Michael Crichton went to. And I signed up for on the spot and said, well, if I go bankrupt, another couple thousand isn't going to matter.
Yeah.
And I went down, and the synchronicities began almost immediately. As the plane is touching down, the lady next to me is reading the retreat brew's book, the retreat leader's book. And I'm like, what the heck? And there's like 180 people in the plane. The only two people going to this are her and I. And we're seated side by side.
That's funny.
And I had signed up at the very last minute too, And so we checked each other out, decided we were both normal. We were both nervous that we were going to something weird. And then all sorts of strange synchronicities happened there. I didn't have a lot of crazy spiritual experiences. It was like, John, you are not allowed to go forward and be mad at your ex-wife in any way. All these funny synchronistic experiences started to happen. Even right down to, I got paired with a gal who was my age, and we're hitting it off and I really like, and then she tells me she's planning on leaving her husband and 2 kids when she gets back from work.
Oh no.
Like, are you kidding me? And my roommate, this guy, a similar thing. I was like, Jesus.
Mirror reflections, right?
So I came out of the retreat, not with a lot of glorious spiritual experiences. Those came later. But with compassion. I think it was the first time I touched on compassion. It was the first time I'd been intimate, open, and vulnerable with a bunch of other people, strangers before. It was the first time I started, you might even say, to begin to feel my feelings in a way I never had before. I don't think I had allowed myself to feel grief at that point, which is probably what I was really feeling. I could feel the energy of fear and anxiety and anger, and I knew how to put that energy to good, productive use. But I didn't know how to just say, shit, man, I'm just sad.
Yeah.
I'm sad for me. I'm sad for my kids. I can't believe this is all happening. And so that's how it began. And the Synchronicity of Love begins there about 20 years ago, where everything fell apart. I went to the retreat, and then everything started to change after that. And the workshop leader taught heart-centered meditation. And it sounds really simple, but he goes, I teach it to my beginning students, my advanced students, and my advanced students. And you might say shadow work too. So heart-centered meditation, shadow work, dream work. Seems like a long time to be out in the desert, 10 days. And that's really all it was, over and over again. And but what I noticed was something happened the minute I began down that path, where like the universe was like supporting me, rolling a red carpet out for me. So you learn that. Okay, now we're going to teach you this, And sometimes I would just barely think about something and then it would be there. Or
Yeah.
I mean, anybody that's experienced, and so I have a really good rational math mind. I've been in business. I ran a chemical company. I gambled at the horse races when I was young. So I'm really good at understanding mathematical probabilities. And so the exciting thing was,
which is how the
oh,
universe works.
what's what?
Which is how the universe works, right?
Yeah, well, except then all these things that were quote unquote impossible or just a coincidence kept happening over and over and over again. So for me, trying as much as I could to stay in my heart, to stay in that state of compassion, unconditional love, which the teacher also taught was really about wholeness. He always said, if you're in your heart, you actually are more resourceful in every situation. And the more I did that, the more these magical doors started to open, the more these magical things started to happen to me. And so the book is 119 short stories, true stories, mostly true stories. And probably about 50% of the book is related in some manner or fashion to dreams. I get a lot of guidance and unusual experiences through dreams.
Wow, that's amazing. And it is very powerful once you learn how to align with your heart, because I think oftentimes in our lives we learn how to not align with our hearts and what that feels like, and then we learn how to align with our hearts and what that feels like. It's almost like this beautiful duality that we have, because it's like our internal guidance system that's saying,
Yeah.
okay, you know what it feels like when you're not in alignment, and now you know what it feels like when you are, and how easily things can flow to you when you are in that alignment. So John, let's talk more about your dreams and how you connect in that way, because you suffered from chronic neck and back pain, correct? And you were able to heal yourself. Let's talk about that.
Ooh, I'd love to. Okay, so
Edward Casey stuff.
I'll start with the back and then I'll go to the neck. And so one of the things, I think they're all interrelated. As I started to meditate more, as I started to feel my feelings and release those pent up emotions that have been there for God knows how long, I also became more and more what I would call just body aware. And it happens slowly over time, but a greater and greater body awareness, and sometimes dreams would come through that would be like, it literally felt like the body was talking to me like, hey, do this, And so, but the backstory was very early in my journey. And so I had chronic neck pain for 6 years. I blamed it on being rear-ended in a car crash. I think it was a classic whiplash injury. Classic, staunch male doesn't go to the doctor. Now he's got pain for the rest of his life. I should have gone to the doctor. And I'd been really athletic too. And it was bumming me out. I could hardly get through my work day. And I tried everything, massage, ultrasound, acupuncture, chiropractic, everything. And everything would give me relief for a day or half a day, and then it'd be right back again. I tried sitting on a bouncy ball at work. I tried standing up at my desk at work. I tried everything. I did, pain-free exercises for the neck. And again, everything would give me relief for a short period of time, but it'd be right back again. So here's where it began to change. I came home from work early one day in tears, again in bed, right before my kids get off the school bus. And I'm laying there going, why the fuck does my neck hurt so bad? And a dream comes through, like instant, like in my face. And it's a monk in a red robe and a shaved head pacing back and forth outside my house. End of dream. So again, at the very beginning, I'm starting to have dreams, but I'm not sure I actually know how to interpret them. And so I went back to Brew, the retreat leader, who had just started this dream forum, and I gave him the background, neck pain, blah, blah, blah. This dream came through. I can't see how it's possibly related. And he comes back and says, that dream has everything to do with why your neck hurts. I'm like, what the? I don't get it. And he goes, well, what does a monk symbolize? Why do they shave their heads? Why do they wear a red robe? Why is he pacing outside your house instead of in your house? And, he just said, I want you to embrace this idea that maybe you have a very spiritual side and you're just in resistance to it. So I was like, oh, okay, maybe, not likely, but maybe, and then, so honestly, a month or two goes by, and then comes another dream about my neck. And now in this dream, Brew is coming towards me. He's got his hands out like this. He's going to heal my neck. And in the dream, I'm like, oh my God, thank God, finally.
Like, finally.
And as he reaches his hand for my neck, an angry old man who lives in my neck looks up at him and says, get the fuck away.
No.
I kid you not. And so again, I shared that dream with Brew, and he just said, look, everybody to one degree or another has a place in their body they carry resistance. Some it's their head, some it's their neck, some it's their back, some it's their gut. You carry resistance in your neck. And there's no doubt this was a period of time where I was possibly massively resisting everything. My company was suffering. I'm a single dad. I'm trying to be mom and dad to my kids. I enormous compassion for all the single parents out there. It's not easy. A company hanging by a thread. I'm running around afraid of death. Dreams are coming through. A whole spiritual side is coming through, which I'm both elated and terrified of at the same time. I mean, I literally felt like the Nazi skinhead who suddenly decided he wants to hang out with the black neighbors across the street. It was that much of a ego shift for me. And so he goes, I want you to just try to bring awareness to all the things you resist in your life and that you're carrying it in your neck. And so literally 2 more years goes by. And here comes the final culminating dream. I'm sitting in a little home office I have, and I have a giant golden thumbtack. I go to stick it in the bulletin board behind me, and it feels strange. I turn around and I plunged it right into the heart of this like Tibetan monk, shaved head, red robe, and he's looking at me with such love. And I realized my neck doesn't hurt anymore. So it was the dreams were trying to make conscious that John unconsciously held all this pain and resistance in my neck. And I have so much more body awareness now that I know how to not let that happen anymore. Does that make sense?
Totally. And so there is this whole concept of body talk. And I work with clients like that. They're like, my elbow hurts. Okay, well, what does your elbow do? Let's go through what your elbow does. Well, it bends and, it's flexible. Well, okay, so where are you not bending? Where are you not being flexible? So it's so literal, how it speaks to us. So you were holding all that in the neck, and you were probably unconsciously thinking at that time, my life is a pain in the neck right now.
Everything's a pain in the neck now.
Everything was a pain in the neck. And so your body was reacting with, there's a pain in the neck, and so it's so literal. And I can really resonate with that, because once you learn how to communicate with the physical body, it speaks right back to you. But with you, like you said, consciously, you weren't accepting that information, but you had to be spoken to through your dream state. And I think many of us do that as well. When we're so restrictive, it's like, all right, well, we're going to get through to you one way or the other, and it's going to be your dreams.
Well, some of us rigid, rational types, a little harder to get through to than others.
I'm the same way. It's like, sometimes it has to smack me across it used to have to smack me across the face. And now I'm like, I'm just going to surrender to this pain and see where it guides me, see where we go. And I think that's the biggest, lesson, is to just surrender to your pain and see where you're guided, to go, and don't question it. Just go. It could be a monk with a shaved head.
Who knows? Okay. The second story and I want to back up just a teeny bit. When I met the quote unquote nutritionist, the undercover healer, I had a history for my entire life of 2 to 3 times a year. I would get a little head cold, and it would drop down into my chest and not go away. It would hang around for weeks. And I would be like, oh, I got bronchitis again. Oh, I got bronchitis again. After I cleared all the grief, I don't think I can even think of one time in the last 10 years that I've had one of those big bronchitis colds that hangs around for weeks. So there is something to it. And I know Chinese medicine talks about that too, that where the problem is in the body is an indication of where the problem is. And so no doubt for me, grief and the lungs were connected.
Yeah, interesting.
So second story now, I also had a long history of throwing my back out. And partly because I was really active and kind of a skinny, scrawny guy that would overdo it a lot. And but this took place probably in about the year 2015 or so. I own my own company, and I have to fly 20 or 25 times a year. And consumer products company, we made cleaning products that were environmentally sound kind of products. And they were sold in retail stores all across the US. So thousands of stores. And so it was normal in my business to fly all the way across the country to have like a 30-minute meeting, like a presentation, and fly all the way home. The day before, so I have to fly from Seattle to Jacksonville, Florida, with a connection to Dallas, both ways. And I throw my back out the day before my trip. And all I can think of is, oh my God, this is going to be terrible. Sitting in an uncomfortable airplane seat, this is going to be horrible.
That's a long flight too.
I know. And so I wake up in the morning, my back still hurts. I mean, it hurts so much that I have to like reach up above my car, and pull my legs up out of the car. I'm standing in line of security and I'm about to hand the guy my boarding pass and my driver's license, just steeling myself. This is going to be a really tough trip. I don't know how I'm going to get through it, but I got to get through it. And all of a sudden inside me, there's somebody or something is singing or humming the chorus to the song, Don't Worry, Be Happy. And it's aiming the vibrations of that happy song to my lower back. And at that point, I was casually aware that I knew vibration could be healing and sound could be healing. And so something in me shifted. I went away from grumbly John, who knew I was going to be, because that's how it always was in the past.
It was that grumpy old man in your neck.
Yeah. He was
moving around.
And I just thought, well, I'm just going to hum and sing to my back. And, the nice thing about airports and airplanes is nobody notices you humming the same tune over and over and over again. And so I did. And so on a scale of 1 to 10, if my pain was at a 6 at the beginning, it was, by the time I got to Dallas, after humming the chorus to Don't Worry, Be Happy, what felt like hundreds of times, and being pinned next to the window by an impossibly large man in the middle seat, my pain had dropped from a 6 to a 4.
Wow.
And I it's kind of funny. If you've ever participated in a kirtan or just done mantras, if you do it over and over and over again, there's something kind of peaceful and lulling about it. So I did it all the way from Dallas to Jacksonville. I did it in my rental car. I did it over dinner with my salesman. I did it at the hotel. I had my meeting in the morning. I hummed all the way back to Dallas and all the way back from Dallas to Seattle. I must have hummed that thing thousands of times. By the time I got back, my pain had gone from a 6 to a 1. It was like I'd never hurt my back.
Wow.
What I've learned from the increasing body awareness, the body has amazing capacity to self-heal. Maybe not as quickly as popping a pill or something like that, but it will self-heal. And you can support that process or get in the way of the process. And I think I've learned over the years how to support that process. And even now, a couple of times my wife and I went on a long trip, driving, and my rear end and back were getting a little creaky and cranky, and I'm cranky about it. And then I suddenly went, start singing again. Within mere minutes, it's like the pain goes away and it's like not that big a deal, So, and so I would suppose the second one wasn't necessarily a dream, but these are some of the things that started to open up in me. And I want to say one thing real quick. Lorna Byrne in her books like to say the angels were always there helping her, supporting her, talking to her, guiding her. And they're always telling her, don't take things so seriously.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I have that curmudgeonly old man in me that kind of takes things really seriously and kind of, thinks that the way it was is the way it will always be. But there's another part of me now that's lighter, freer, more open, happier. And it's a really beautiful thing.
Yeah. And so really what you were doing is you were resonant tuning, and the ancient Egyptians knew how to do this. They would tune into certain frequencies, solfeggio frequencies, and hum it and resonant tune their body. And so, I learned, because I too, like you, would throw my back out occasionally. And I was working in a high stress, long hour job, in healthcare, and it was extremely emotionally taxing. And I would notice my back, I'd throw it out all the time. And what I started to recognize is that I was out of alignment, literally out of alignment when that would happen. And so what you were doing from an unconscious standpoint was literally pulling your body back into alignment. And so now I know when my back is out, I know I'm out of alignment, and I have to kind of consciously step back and say, okay, how do I center myself again with my heart, and bringing myself back in tune. And it's funny you said, don't worry, be happy. When I was a senior in high school, that I had to do a speech, and that was the song that I did the speech on, was Don't Worry, Be Happy. And so there's a synchronicity in itself.
Another one.
But it's really funny because there is that inner childlike nature within each of us, and we get this grumpy old man or woman kind of conflicting with this carefree, joyful child within us. And if we can always kind of lean towards the joyful, carefree child, then it will be amazing how you can heal your body in that way. Because when we're stuck in grumpy old man or woman over here, we're really creating restriction. We're creating that tension, you know, in the body. And so just releasing that. And, you know, I don't know, it's hard to say, oh, I don't give a care in the world, because I do about things. But there's times when it's like, I used to worry about things that now I'm just like, nah, that's, you know, and I guess maybe that comes with age. I don't know. If y'all out there listening who are in your teens, start doing that now.
No, one of the things I learned from that experience too was, and I'm still learning every single day, is just because something was a certain way doesn't mean it has to be or will continue to be. And I like to use the example, if you were, you know, mauled, bitten severely by a big black dog at the age of 3, it's entirely likely you might be afraid of big black dogs for the rest of your life. And that's just kind of how it is being human. Things happen, especially when you're young, terrifying, traumatic things, and it's hard to let go of them. But I think the mind is so intent on building a sense of safety around familiarity that, you know, for me, I've had to look at things over and over again and say, okay, it's always been that way in the past, but that doesn't mean it'll be. So my little mantra is, I don't have to do it that way anymore.
Yeah.
And, you know, and I talked to a therapist friend of mine, counselor, and she said, John, you would not believe how many people come in and I point and say, the grass really is greener on the other side, but they won't go there because where they're in, even though it's painful and suffering, it's familiar, and they won't give up the familiar. And so I like to encourage people all the time, okay, I get it, it's always been that way in the past, but it could be different next time.
Yeah. And it's fear too. I think, you know, they see that the grass is greener, but they think, well, you know, what if it's not as good as I have right now? And so that's where I think the synchronicity of love is bringing yourself back into your heart and feeling it, you know, feeling into your body. Does this feel like the right decision? Does this feel good to me? If it feels off, if your body feels restricted, if it feels tense, you know, listen to those subtle cues, because our body is speaking to us. That's our intuition, you know, and I think we're all learning how to tune back into our own intuitive abilities. And like you said, the more you heal that fear, the more you move through whatever it is that may be anchoring us down, these intuitive abilities will also amp up too, like you talked about your synchronicities. And I love it when I get those synchronicities, because I know I'm in alignment. It's almost like this validation, and it feels so good when I'm like, oh my gosh, my angelic team is just showering me with synchronicities, and it feels so good.
I love that. God, there's so much I want to comment on. You know, as far as synchronicities and healing, I hardly know where to begin, but it is utterly fascinating. And sometimes my poor little brain is like, how the heck does this all work? My wife and I were on, so I sold my company right before COVID hit, which was, thank God for that, because that would have just been hell if I'd been trying to run my company through COVID. So I'm 63 years old now, and my wife and I decided to do something I had never done. And we were going to get in the car and take a 3-month road trip from Seattle to Florida and back. We're going to drive along the Gulf Coast, see all the sights, and make a loop trip back up through the upper Midwest. But we left right when COVID was beginning. And I don't think myself or most people knew it was going to be what it turned out to be. And it kind of started on the West Coast and was chasing us across the country. And so anyway, that's a whole story in itself. Suddenly, like, the roads were empty. And
I traveled during COVID too, and I loved it. I thought it was great.
Oh, we loved it too.
I did more national parks.
Some of them were closed, but they didn't mind if you just walked in and you were all alone in there. So, but anyway, we're on our way back, and we're in southern Utah in the middle of nowhere, and COVID had emptied, from what our experience, all the trails. I mean, so there was, if you were out hiking, you were lucky to see one person every hour. And the ones you did usually would turn away, covering their face, you know, run and hide behind the trees. And so anyway, we had wanted to cut back on our way home through Boise, but the place that we had booked canceled at the last minute, which was going on a lot with COVID, because even the owners didn't know whether they should be renting their houses out or not. Back then, people thought you got COVID from touching things. So we're like, geez, what should we do? Should we go? Maybe we should go up through Yellowstone, but it's April, the weather can be kind of dicey then. And about this time, a couple walks by and they were actually friendly, which was really hard to find. And they were also on a big, long road trip. And we were just chatting casually about how, we can't decide whether to go home through Boise or go home through Yellowstone. And, they're from Boise. And they're like, oh, you got to go through Boise. You got to stay here. You got to see this. You got to do this. Get a home on the road up to Bogus Basin, and there's great hiking. And, anyway, it was, I don't know, 600 miles from Boise, literally in the middle of nowhere. Friendliest couple, plant just shows up. And then, of course, we go back to our room, look, and there's a home on the road to Bogus Basin on Airbnb. We got it. We stayed there and we had a great time in Boise. And
Boise is a great city.
It is a great city. And so anyway, it was just those kind of funny little, I would call them support from the universe things, just show up in those random places.
Yeah. And I experienced that too, John, during that time. It was almost like everyone was in lockdown and I was like, no, I'm going to still continue to live my life. And I went to Glacier, I went to Crater Lake, I went to Yellowstone. I was all over. I traveled from New York, from Idaho to New York. I drove there and back to go visit my family. And I had an amazing, all alone with my cat. It was me and my cat, my three-legged cat. That's what we did. And I met so many beautiful people along the way, and I didn't allow fear to set in. Like a lot of people would be like, what are you doing traveling across the country by yourself? And and I'm like, I had met such amazing people. I stayed at Airbnbs. I met, I had an amazing time. It was wonderful. And then once they lifted all the restrictions, I had no desire to travel. It was like, I did the opposite of what everybody did, and so I think it's funny though.
The same thing. And
it's all frequency and vibration.
In our lifetime. Nobody on the road. And I think we got a little spoiled too, because the Airbnbs got real cheap during that period of time.
They did.
A year later, I went to book and I was like, oh my God, they're so expensive now. So
isn't it funny?
We stayed in like a mansion in Park City, Utah, because they closed the ski area too. And the town was all shut down. And for like, I forget, like $130, $150 a night. And it was like this, 6-bedroom, 6,000 square foot mansion. And it was, and there were animals walking down the streets, it was amazing. Big tourist areas. There's they call it the Plaza in Santa Fe that normally would have thousands of people. We were one of, us, maybe 2 other people and 1 policeman. And it was bizarre.
It was bizarre. It was almost like we were living in an alternate timeline or an alternate reality. At least that's the way I explain it. Some people were in a vibration of fear and others were in a vibration of joy and freedom, and I think that's what this whole topic has been about today, is finding freedom and fearlessness through that awakening. And I think, just understanding that when you can overcome whatever it is that you fear, you feel freedom. You feel that fearlessness. And so, John, this has been an amazing conversation. And I feel I could have you back on again on the show. We could talk about a variety of topics. And so I've really enjoyed this conversation with you today. So how can people contact you? Where can they learn more? How can they find your book?
So my book is The Synchronicity of Love, Stories That Heal, Transform, and Awaken. You can find it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and I just found out last week, Target and Walmart too.
Great.
So, and my website is johndavidlatta.com. My last name is spelled Latta, johndavidlatta.com. You can find a blog with some unusual articles that I've written there, more information about my books, workshops, one-on-one sessions I do, bunch of other podcasts there, lots of cool stuff there.
Well, great. Thank you, John. I really appreciate the energy that you brought to this show today and that you're putting out into the world. And I think many of us are learning how to tune into the synchronicity of love. And like you said, your spiritual advisor said he teaches it to the beginners and to the advanced. And, we're all learning how to connect to our hearts deeper and deeper and deeper. So I appreciate you and all that you do. Thank you for coming on the show today, John.
Thank you so much, Tanya. I appreciate the invitation. It was really fun chatting with you.
You deserve to navigate your life as an empath in alignment with health, happiness, and abundance. To learn more about the services that I provide, including Beyond Quantum Healing Hypnosis, EFT tapping in the emotion code, Visit my website at www.thesoulcafe.org.